Why did South Sudan break away from Sudan? Sudan once was the largest country in Africa until it split into two in 2011. But why? The majority Christian South felt severely neglected by the majority Muslim North and the government in Khartoum since Sudan's independence in 1956. These tensions eventually led to a horrific civil war that lasted 22 years and in which some 2 million people lost their lives. A peace agreement was finally reached between the parties in 2005. And in 2011, the South was allowed to vote on whether or not to become an independent country. With around 99% of the votes in favor of independence, South Sudan broke away from Sudan on July 9, 2011, creating the world's newest country.
The Dinka tribe from South Sudan have the world's tallest humans. In a Dinka village, people come together for a special celebration. They sing, dance, and share stories. Among them, you can't help but notice their remarkable height. They are slim and tall, with both men and women measuring well over 6 feet, some into the 7. In fact, Manu Ball, the tallest NBA player in history, is from South Sudan. The Dinka people's height can be attributed to a few reasons. First, genetics play a role. Just like some families have distinct traits, the Dinka tribe has inherited genes that make them taller on average. Second, their traditional lifestyle supports good nutrition. The Dinka are agro-pastoralists, which means they raise cattle and grow crops. This provides them with healthy food, contributing to their growth. Additionally, their environment plays a part. South Sudan, where the Dinka live, is blessed with abundant sunlight. Sunlight helps the body produce vitamin D, which is crucial for strong bones and growth. Being tall is a source of pride for the Dinka tribe. It is a unique feature that sets them apart. Subscribe to our YouTube channel now and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't get to miss when next we post new videos.
Where are you from?
Sudan.
Tell me something most people don't know about Sudan.
So there's currently an ongoing war in Sudan that just erupted in April between the two major generals in Sudan fighting over power. General Hameti, who is the head of a paramilitary group, and then General Burhan, who's the head of the Sudanese army.
So you just came back from Sudan?
Yes.
What was it like over there?
Scary to say the least. You never really comprehend the gravity of these things until you're in it.
What's happening in Sudan? If you've been following the news, you might have seen the reports of fighting throughout Sudan, which some are warning could be the beginning of a new civil war. And to understand what's going on, we need to go back a couple of years. You see, in 2019, Sudan's dictatorship was overthrown in a revolution, with promises that democracy would be soon on the way. However, in 2021, the Sudanese military and a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces took power over the country in a coup. Since then, the military and RSF have been squabbling over the power that should be shared, and these tensions have finally come to a head. The RSF, who have ties to the UAE and Russia, launched attacks across Sudan, including in the capital Khartoum. Since then, fighting continued across the country, and foreign nationals are being evacuated from Sudan en masse. And with no sign of an end to hostilities, it looks like once again it'll be the Sudanese people who suffer in this fight between two power-hungry armed groups.
Hi, it's day 198 of the war in Sudan, and I'm here to give you a quick and dirty of what's been going on. First up, some geography. This is Sudan. We are a country in Africa. We're bordered by Egypt, Libya, Chad, the Central African Republic, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. We had a beautiful popular uprising turned revolution in 2019 that was totally ruined by these two guys. On the right, we have, we'll just call him Burhan. He's the leader of the Sudanese military called SAF. On the left, you have, we'll just call him Hameti. He's the leader of the Rapid Support Forces called the RSF. I'll cut to the chase. They're both bad. Burhan is bad because he was part of the military dictatorship that Sudanese people revolted against in 2019 in the first place. And then after the revolution, instead of handing over power to a civilian government like everybody wanted, he decided, nah, I want to be president. Hemeti is bad because he's a psychopath. Before the fancy uniform and the fancy title, he was leader of the Janjaweed. If you remember the Darfur War, you know what the Janjaweed are. If you don't, then it is basically a militia contracted by the Sudanese government to kill people in Darfur. Fast forward, he is legitimized by the Sudanese government. They go from Janjaweed to Rapid Support Forces. He gets a fancy uniform and a fancy title. He amasses mountains of wealth and has aspirations to lead. Up until they started tussling on April 15th, these two were essentially president and vice president of Sudan. Now, Burhan and SAF claim that the RSF is a rebel militia, they're a terrorist organization, and that SAF is the one protecting Sudan. Meanwhile, Hemeti and the RSF claim that they are protectors of democracy, that they are fighting against SAF to rid it of the remnants of the previous dictatorship, i.e., Burhan. So on April 15th, the war breaks out. It starts in Khartoum, essentially, and then moves through cities and towns all through central Sudan and into western Sudan. This, by the way, is a map from October 7th showing the number of displaced people and where they were displaced to. Pause to read. Now, earlier I said they're both bad. That's true, but the RSF is way worse. Over the last 7 months, the RSF has been committing heinous crimes against the Sudanese people. Besides the indiscriminate killing and bombing, they've also been raiding and looting towns, villages, neighborhoods, homes, expelling people from their homes after they've raided and looted them, and then sometimes even moving. Sexual violence is also a weapon that they have often used in the last 6 or so months, and all of these crimes that I've listed are part of their legacy dating back to when they were still the Janjaweed. There is absolutely no way that I could list all of the devastating effects that this war has had on Sudan and Sudanese people over the last 6 months in a 3-minute video. And after practically 6.5 months of fighting, SAF and the RSF are currently in negotiations and can't even agree on the basics. And why would they need to, when their funding is still rolling in and the world has shown it does not care?
You may have heard about the conflict going on in Sudan, but what is really happening and what started it all? Let's break it down together.
As the fighting between two rival military forces continues, thousands of people have been killed and millions have been displaced from their homes. The fighting broke out in the capital Khartoum in mid-April 2023, rapidly spreading to other parts of the country.
The conflict itself has been really brewing for years. The generals of the two rival forces led a joint military coup in 2021 and oversaw a violent crackdown against peaceful protesters. Very little was done to hold them to account for their crimes.
Before the outbreak of the conflict, competition between the two had been building for months.
I am from Sudan, and when I call my family, sounds of gunshots and explosions fill the phone. I don't want to keep worrying about their safety or anyone else in Sudan. So what needs to happen now? Both sides have shown complete disregard to the laws of war and for the safety of civilians. Governments should coordinate their efforts, apply targeted sanctions against abusive leaders, and call for accountability. And both sides should allow access to humanitarian organization without restrictions.
Been forgotten.
So what's at stake for Sudan in the region? Before we go any further, let's unpack how the country got here. In 2019, a civilian uprising ousted autocratic ruler Omar al-Bashir. A transitional government is put in place. In October 2021, it is overthrown by these two men. The leader of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, widely known as Hemeti, and the leader of the Sudanese Armed Forces, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. The two former friends could not agree on the direction the country should take, and the war broke out in April 2023. So that's the background, but what is at stake? Let's start with Darfur. The region has recently seen some of the worst atrocities, with terrifying echoes of ethnic cleansing that happened 20 years ago. At the time, the Bashir government used Arab militia, collectively known as the Janjaweed, to brutally put down a rebellion by 9 Arab Darfuri groups. The Janjaweed militia was later transformed into the RSF.
What many people fear are signs of wide-scale ethnic cleansing. People fear that genocide might be returning to Darfur as the Rapid Support Forces and their allied Arab militias appear to be in control of most of the region.
But there is a danger that more armed groups may be drawn into the conflict, which would inevitably escalate the war.
Some of the rebel groups that are threatening to depart from their position of neutrality are ethnically from the Zaghawa group, which is the dominant ethnic group in power in Chad. So many people fear that if Al-Fashir is attacked and these armed groups depart from their neutral position, that fight could embroil Chad.
UN experts have expressed alarm at the escalation of violence in Sudan, particularly sexual violence committed primarily by the Rapid Support Forces. With so many forced to flee, including 3 million children, the humanitarian crisis in Sudan is deepening and spilling into neighboring countries.
Obviously, 1.3 million people moving across the borders into Chad, Ethiopia, Eritrea, South Sudan, Central African Republic. These are going to create burdens for the host communities where those refugees reside. We have received a number of concerns from the Chadian side on that, as well as from the refugees themselves about the level of support they're getting.
Now, this conflict also has the added challenge of vested interest from various international players.
Sudan's war is actually a global war. The Sudanese armed forces is supported by Egypt, by Iran, by Turkey, by Saudi Arabia, and the Rapid Support Forces have been supported both financially and through munitions transfers by the United Arab Emirates. This means that even if a deal between the generals can be reached, the proxy nature of this war means that solutions need to be found elsewhere as well.
So with all these dynamics at play, what is at stake for Sudan?
The territorial integrity of Sudan as we know it. Many speak about a sort of a Libya scenario of a split country, but we may indeed already be seeing the fracturing of the country into many pieces.
With the two generals at war, coupled with the effects of climate change, humanitarian organizations warn that the situation will only get worse in 2024 and that the country is headed towards a hunger catastrophe. All this.
Hi. The day I've been dreading and so many other Sudanese have been dreading is here, April 15th. A year ago today, war broke out in Sudan and upended all of our lives. And I've been racking my brain over the last few weeks trying to figure out what I'm going to say when this day comes. In the last year, I've lost the home I helped build. We've lost family members. My family has become scattered. And the one place we had to reunite is no longer. I thought about getting on here and spouting the stats off to you of how this war has devastated Sudan over the last year, but nothing I can say will convey the immense tragedy that this is. It's not a tragedy, it's a catastrophe. Tragedy is quiet. This is anything but. A few days ago, I made a video and I asked you to watch Yusr al-Baghid's documentary called War at Home, which covers the last year of war in Sudan. And when I made that video, I had not watched it. So I did this morning. I made it a point to do so. In watching it, it has become even more apparent to me that as Sudanese people, we have not fully grasped just how much this war has taken from us, just how much this war has destroyed, and just how long it's going to take to rebuild in its aftermath. Many Sudanese activists have been calling this a counter-revolutionary war. And I agree. Everything points to that. Everything points to this war being orchestrated as a punishment to the Sudanese people for daring to revolt. In the revolution of 2019, the RSF saw its demise, and the military saw an end to its iron grip on the country. And neither of them were having it. So here we are. If you wish to get a glimpse into what Sudanese people have been through over the last year, I highly recommend that you watch the documentary War at Home. It won't give you the full picture, it can't, because the war is ongoing and shows no signs of ending anytime soon. But it will give you an idea. And perhaps answer the question, why have Sudanese people been screaming for 367 days to keep eyes on Sudan?
April 15th, Saturday morning, Khartoum, the capital of Sudan, a country that is basically never peaceful. However, this time it is even worse than before. In the streets of Sudan's most important city, chaos reigned. Fighter jets clashed in the sky. Military helicopters clashed with each other, and the streets turned into a battleground between two feuding sides, specifically between government troops and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the so-called RSF.
Everyone is trying to escape the city, and thus bus is going to Madani, which is south of Khartoum.
There were fighter jets, and just sounded like gunshots, and there's just a lot of chaos going on. And there was like smoke everywhere.
It's actually a rivalry between two generals. One is the country's de facto ruling army commander Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his enemy RSF leader Mohammed Hamdan Daglo, known as Hemeti. During the October 2021 putsch, the two generals formed a united front to protect civilians from the authorities. However, as time passed, Hemeti denounced the coup, siding with the civilians, and thus came into conflict with al-Burhan. The dispute between the two most important generals in this African country made it impossible to resolve the internal political crisis.
أخاطبكم وبلادنا تواجه خطر التفكك وأقول إن الرصاصة حين تنفلت من السلاح لن تميز بين المعتدي وغير المعتدي والضحايا هم السودانيون.
All this comes at a time when smaller conflicts between tribes are spilling across the country. We're not talking about a small, insignificant country here. Sudan is the size of half of Europe or a third of the United States. In addition, Sudan controls one of the key maritime routes through which 30% of all maritime cargo traffic passes annually, specifically the Red Sea, which also flows into Egypt and ends with the Suez Canal. The country is facing the biggest crisis in its history. One could even say that it is now a fallen country whose future is in question. In 2017, as a result of the war in Darfur, the conflict on the border with southern Sudan, as well as the migrant crisis and famine, the per capita GDP of this African country fell more than 4 times. The current coup worsens an already dire economic situation. All this in a country that until recently, because of its location and raw materials, was being considered for potential wealth and power on the continent. The international community stresses that war will not only further exacerbate Sudan's ruin, but will also threaten global transportation routes and endanger the stability of Africa as a whole.
أنا اتضرر اللي حصل للبيت.
That's why in this episode we'll look at what exactly is going on in Sudan, why this conflict is of utmost importance to global security, and why Sudan has become so stagnant. So let's move on to the next episode. Generals Abdel Fattah Burhan and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who head the two forces, are competing for power over Sudan, which was supposed to be democratic after all. The conflict comes 4 years after the overthrow of dictator Omar Bashir and was supposed to be a transitional period between military and civilian rule. Sudanese wanted democratic elections late last year, but those dreams were postponed. Contrary to popular opinion of Sudan as a backward and poor country, this one was not so poor after all. As recently as early 2017, the country's GDP per capita was on par with that of Egypt, which is considered one of the continent's most stable and robust economies. What's more, it was at the same level as Ukraine, so opportunities for development actually. Sudan has the world's 20th largest oil deposits, up to 12th in terms of gold, as well as raw materials such as uranium and iron. More than half of the government's total income comes from oil exports. It is it that was supposed to provide a guarantee of development opportunities. However, with South Sudan's declaration of independence, the oil fields were split in half, and it is these that the two countries compete over to this day. This limits production capacity and further slows down further exploration work on availability. And how did the last years in Sudan look briefly? Well, in 1972, Sudan ended one of the longest civil wars in Africa, which lasted for more than 17 years. But as early as 1983, another conflict erupted in the southern part of the country over control of natural resources and social inequality. In 2005, a peace agreement was signed between the government and the southern rebels, which led to the creation of the Republic of South Sudan as a separate state in 2011. If we look at the map, the south was inhabited mainly by Christians while the north was inhabited by followers of Islam, which made the sense of secession all the more conditional. In contrast, a military coup took place there in 1989, resulting in the seizure of power by an authoritarian government led by Omar al-Bashir. His rule was characterized by human rights violations, repression of the political opposition, and various social groups, as well as ethnic conflicts. In 2019, as a result of mass protests by the population, al-Bashir was overthrown by the military. And today, despite democratic aspirations, the struggle for power in Khartoum continues and is taking a bloody toll of more than 100 people at the time of publication of this video. As of Sunday, April 16th, RSF claimed to control 90% of Khartoum. The two sides in the conflict in social media messages keep shouting every now and then about who owns what part of the country. No one really knows. And even with the end of this conflict, there is no sign that Sudan will suddenly become a haven of peace.
نحن بنصارع في الأكل والشراب والتعليم والعلاج ما وفروا لنا يصارعوا في شرب.
It is worth noting that although both sides in this conflict are worth each other and only care about money and power, the RSF is nevertheless known primarily for its brutal genocide in Darfur. The Darfur conflict is a still ongoing armed conflict taking place in the western part of Sudan in Africa. The conflict has now created the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. The number of victims of the latest conflict is estimated at more than 200,000 dead. The total death toll in the confrontation, which has been going on for more than 50 years, reaches more than 2 million victims, while more than 4.5 million people have been forced into exile.